was Kim Walker-Smith with Mama. You're on 94.9. It is at 4:15. And it's Tuesday. So, of course, Tuesday, Creation Ministries International. And we have Dr. John this afternoon. Good afternoon, Dr. John.
Yeah, good afternoon, Mick. Great to be here.
It's great to have you today, Dr. John. And, of course, you guys have a website, creation.com, which is really cool. You can answer all the questions that you might come up with in regards to creation, evolution, even dinosaurs, aliens, that sort of thing. But today, we're asking people to send their questions in. If they have any questions, just send them through to you, Dr. John, and you'll answer them on air. And you can text those questions to us if you have any questions at any moment. 0401 949 949. That's 0401 949 949. So, what do you have for us this afternoon, Dr. John?
I've got a real surprise, Mick, this hour.
Ooh.
Yeah, this is something that I've never talked about before, and I don't think any previous creation speakers have ever talked about it either.
All right.
And this one's especially for the ladies, because I know that we've got a lot of women who are regular listeners. So if you're listening, Sylvia and Sue and all the other regular ladies, this one is for you. Now, I was sent an article a couple of days ago by a lady who's an old friend. She lives in the Riverina. Her name's Marion, but I doubt if she can listen in. But I was really gobsmacked, and I was absolutely blessed by this.
She could listen in. She could just tune in via our app.
But I did tell her that I was going to talk about it today, but I don't know. Now, I can't guarantee that it's 100% accurate, but as they say, never let the facts get in the way of a good story, because this is a good story. So I'm telling it anyway. And the article was about the uncanny relationship between the Jewish feasts and the conception and development of a human baby. Mm-hmm. Now, I mean, only God, our amazing Creator, could do this. Really fit this into the Jewish feasts. And I must say, I was going backwards and forwards to my Bible to check things out and so on, and really, I mean, humanity was the pinnacle of His creation. So It's not surprising that you can find all of these connections all throughout the Scripture. Anyway, look, the first Jewish feast, the beginning of the ceremonial year for them, is Passover. Mm-hmm. Now, Passover takes place on the 14th day of the first month for the Jewish year, right? Mm-hmm. 14th day. Now, when does a woman ovulate? 14th day of the month, right? So, consistent with Passover, and that's when the egg gets released and has to be fertilised within about 24 hours or it dies. Mm-hmm. And I was reminded of this, but what is on the Jewish plate at the Passover feast?
I don't know.
A boiled egg.
Okay.
A boiled egg. Now, that's representing it's symbolising the new life that they were getting when they came out of Egypt, came out of bondage and slavery into Egypt, and into freedom after their deliverance. And of course, I only thought after I read that, what's the Christian equivalent feast to Passover? Easter.
Yeah, we have eggs.
Eggs! I mean, that's been a Christian tradition. Now, they probably got it from the Jewish Passover, and of course nowadays it's chocolate eggs, but it used to be boiled eggs, and they used to paint them in all sorts of different colours.
I prefer the taste of the chocolate ones.
Yeah, I probably prefer the chocolate ones as well. But I'm sure that's where it comes from. Uh-huh. And the Jews were then required to have the days of unleavened bread. 7 days they had to have unleavened bread. Mm-hmm. And it's a bit obscure what that really means. But remember, Jesus said, unless a grain of wheat falls into the ground and dies, it doesn't produce anything.
Yep.
Well, of course, during that 7 days, what happens to our little baby egg? gets implanted in that time. So it's planted in the soil.
Yep.
Right. So I'm as I say, the parallels are not absolutely specific, but they're pretty close.
Yep.
Right. Now, the next feast is Pentecost. 50 days later.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, 50 days after Passover is Pentecost. That's what the word means. And at about 50 days gestation, that's when the developing embryo is recognisably human.
Uh-huh.
Right? Now, what does the Jewish Pentecost mean? Well, it's obviously not really certain. They don't really know what they're celebrating, but they think it's probably the giving of the law at Mount Sinai. And all the Jewish people said, "Okay, whatever the Lord tells us to do, that we will do." And our baby has now become an obviously human baby at about the same time. Okay, well, the next Jewish feast is at the beginning of the 7th month. That's Rosh Hashanah, and 7 months is about the time that the baby's hearing is developed. Okay. So what's the start of Rosh Hashanah? The blowing of the trumpets.
Okay.
So our baby's going to get woken up by the blowing of the trumpets.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, they have the Feast of Tabernacles. And this is about the time when the baby becomes viable when it's born. Now, tabernacles was where they were all supposed to camp outside in tents,
Mm-hmm.
right? So our baby is viable if it's born at that time, right? And then tabernacles is followed by Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement, and that was a blood sacrifice. And it's about this time that the baby starts to develop adult blood, because before that it's only got fetal hemoglobin.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So anyway, I mean, it's not an exact parallel, but it's pretty close. But the next one is really good, because the next feast is Hanukkah, right, which happens on the 25th day of the 9th month. Now remember, the 14th day of the first month is Passover, 25th day of the 9th month is Hanukkah. Mm-hmm. Okay, so 9 months and 11 days later, about the time that the baby is born.
Yeah.
So what's Hanukkah? That's the lighting of the 9-branch candlestick. You know, real celebration and joy. And Hanukkah goes for 8 days. What happens on the 8th day if the baby's a boy? He gets circumcised and he's admitted as a genuine child of the living God.
Yes.
You know? So, I mean, it seems as if it's stretching things a little bit, but gosh, isn't it interesting?
Yeah.
You know, I thought that was absolutely fantastic, and I thought it was such a good story that I thought I'd better share it on the program today. And I've never talked about that before because I didn't know it.
Yeah, well, you just made me aware of something. The Jews actually call it the Festival of Pentecost.
Oh yeah, Pentecost comes from the Jewish 50.
I didn't realise that. I just always knew about, you know.
Yeah, well, it's actually the Feast of First Fruits, I think, Pentecost. Well, I mean, you can think of it in all sorts of things.
I just think of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, well, that's right. But that's when the first fruits, sorry, not the first fruits, the beginning of the harvest. Right, was the Jewish Pentecost. Yeah. Well, that was the beginning of the harvest in the Christian church too.
True,
you know,
yes.
3,000 people born again on the same day.
Yeah, of course, yeah,
you know?
yeah.
So really, it's look, It's not
Wow.
beyond God to have all of these things fit into place. And I thought this was fantastic. I'd never heard it before.
Yep.
It was a fantastic article. And thank you, Marion, for sending it. And I hope you ladies who were listening got some joy out of that, because I think it's a great parallel.
Yeah, it is pretty cool. And to understand, I guess, I was only saying to you, I just started reading about one of those feasts last night. I was sort of wondering what it was all about, because, the Jewish festivals are a little bit different to what we celebrate, and particularly the names of them, they're a little confusing. You sort of think, I wonder what that was, because, of course, half our Bible is pretty much theirs. So,
well, it's not just that too. The Jewish feasts seem to follow God's timetable, or God's timetable seems to be linked with the Jewish feasts.
Yeah.
You mentioned before the that attack by Hamas on the 7th of October,
Yep.
which was at the feast of Yom Kippur. I mean, a lot of the significant things that have happened in the world follow the timetable of the Jewish feasts. So they're pretty amazing, that linkage.
yeah, absolutely. Now, can I just remind anyone or everyone that might want to send a question, only because we often get these messages that come through. Someone's tried to ring on our text line. If you do have a question, please just send it to the text line 0401 949 949. You can only text or SMS that number.
Yeah. Well, we'd love to get the questions, but as Mick says, you've got to text them, not try and talk to them.
Yes, because there's no one here to answer the phone except for us, and we're talking to you right now, so we can't answer the phone. Thank you, Dr. John. We're going to go into a little bit of a break now. We're going to listen to Ren Collective with a song called Plans, and we'll come back to Dr. John shortly. That was Colton Dixon, Can't Quit You. You're on 94.9. It is 21 minutes to 5. And we have Dr. John in the studio from Creation Ministries International. He can answer your questions. If you have any questions, send them through to our text line, SMS 0401 949 949. Now, Dr. John, it's been very interesting talking about some of the festivals, the Jewish festivals, and how they align with making a baby.
Yeah, that's right, Mick. And we're going to follow on from that now and talk a little bit about some of the inherited defects that we get, like which are called mutations. Mm-hmm. And of course, the evolutionists say that mutations are the driving force of evolution. But we're just going to show that really it's just impossible. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. But to do that, we have to talk a bit about genetics and inheritance. And then we have to talk about DNA. And DNA is the software program that produces our bodies, which is the hardware.
Yep.
Right? Now, if you think about the egg cell that we were talking about, it's a single cell, right? And it's got its DNA packaged in 23 containers called chromosomes.
Yep.
But the egg cell's only got one set of the 23 containers. So when it gets fertilised, it gets the other set, right? So here we've got a fertilised egg, which now has two sets of 23 containers called chromosomes.
Yep.
And that is the program that starts it dividing and becoming eventually a full-grown baby human being.
Yep.
Right. So what really happens now? One set of those 23 containers obviously comes from mother, one from father, and there's a bit of mixing goes on as the baby develops and as the human being develops, so that the single set that the woman has produced in her egg some of it's come from her father, some of it's come from her mother, and vice versa in the sperm cell.
You've talked about DNA before and how it's like a program, and then that program is pretty much what makes us.
It is a program. It is the software.
I was just reading the other day about the theosaline, the Tasmanian tiger that they're trying to bring back to life. And they have completely mapped the genome. They've actually got a little tiny piece of the DNA. And this is like a teeny weeny bit, and they put it into a mouse. Just a tiny weeny bit of DNA, and the mouse's head changed into the shape of the thiosaline's head. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. Now, this is a tiny piece of DNA. Now, you talk about this mothers and fathers coming together. Now, we know that that's the program to build us. But what tells those two bits of DNA that are going together how to go together?
Well, that's the mystery of conception, isn't it? I mean, this is what God designed at the beginning of creation. So, when you say what tells, I don't know what tells them, but God told them in the beginning, And then when we think of that program that builds our whole bodies, and every nucleated cell in our bodies has a complete set of 2 sets of 23 containers. Every one of them.
On every cell.
Every cell has a complete set.
Wow.
And I mean, a lot of the cells, like skin cells and the cells lining our digestive tract and so on, they turn over all the time. They're always getting turned over. And sometimes when the cells divide, there's a copying mistake, and that's called a mutation, a change. Now, if that happens in the what we call the germ cells, like in the ovarian egg cells or testicular sperm cells, then that defect, that copying mistake, can be passed on to offspring, and that's what we call a mutation, and they usually result in an inferior cell. So if it's passed on to offspring, then that offspring is going to carry a part of its DNA that is inferior. Now, this is how we get the inherited diseases. And the whole foundation of evolutionary belief depends on these mutations improving the program.
Yeah, it's like a mistake getting better.
Yeah, that's right. But unfortunately, they don't improve the program. They nearly always make the program worse. Yep. Sometimes not in a major way, but certainly in even a very, very minor way.
Yep.
But the evolutionists then point to a couple of things to try and prove their point, right? And they point to the disease called sickle cell anemia, and they also point to the development of resistance in bacteria to antibiotics.
Yep.
But when you have a look at what's actually going on, you can see that they're completely mistaken in assuming that these mutations are helpful.
Yep.
If you think about the one that is associated with sickle cell anemia, it's a defect in hemoglobin, and if you have 2 copies of that gene, you've got the full-blown sickle cell anemia disease. You're anemic, and you've got a problem with your red blood cells, which form a sickle shape when they're exposed to low oxygen tension. Mm-hmm. So, people get very, very ill if they go into altitude or even into flight in aircraft when you're in a pressurized cabin. But the interesting thing is that the people who only have one gene for that instead of the 2, they're carriers. And they seem to have some sort of resistance to malaria. So in malarious areas, you find lots of people with those, with just that that mutation, but only on one set of their DNA.
Yep.
So lots of babies are born with sickle cell anemia because they get a set from mother and father.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but one of the reasons why, I'm assuming this, one of the reasons why they're resistant to malaria is because the malaria parasite proliferates in the red blood cell.
Yep.
Now, if you've got a defective red blood cell, then the malaria parasite's not going to be able to proliferate so well.
Yeah.
So paradoxically, you have a resistance to malaria, but because you've got a defect that is harmful.
Yep.
So, how can that possibly be an example of evolution in action when really it's going backwards? It's not going upwards and forwards, which is really what it's got to do.
Yep.
You know? And of course, the same thing happens really with antibiotic resistance. When you look at that superficially, it looks like the bacteria are getting stronger and tougher and able to outmuscle the antibiotics that get thrown at them.
Yep.
But really, it's not like that at all, because sometimes you get bacteria that have got a defect in their own metabolism,
Yep.
and that means they can't metabolize the antibiotic. So they survive in the presence of the antibiotic, whereas the stronger and tougher bacteria, which don't have that defect, they get knocked off, right?
Yeah.
So you eventually get the situation where all of the bacteria are resistant to that particular antibiotic because they are all inferior, not superior. And so you then have to go and find another antibiotic which starts to knock them off, but mixed in with them will be some that are even more inferior, and they can't metabolize the new one.
Yeah.
So it's a downward progression, not an upward progression. So for the evolutionists to point to both of those things, sickle cell anemia and bacterial resistance to antibiotics, it really means they don't understand the science behind it, because it's impossible for that to produce evolution. It's not upwards and forwards, it's downwards and backwards in both cases.
So it's basically less information, not more.
That's right. Less information and defective information. And they talk about the bacteria evolving resistance. Well, no, they're not evolving resistance. They've got a mutation that has given them resistance. They don't evolve it under the pressure of the antibiotic. They've got it already, and so they are defective bacteria right from the outset.
Yeah. Wow. Well, Dr. John, very interesting stuff today, talking about babies, how they're created, and then looking back at the cells, right back to the original, I guess, building block. That's almost what it is, isn't it?
Well, the software that's contained in the first building block.
Yeah, exciting stuff. Well, Dr. John, thank you. Another awesome week. And, of course, we've got somebody else from Creation Ministries next week. I believe we're going to have Dr. Don Batten.
Yeah, well, he's a good one to talk to about mutations. He's a plant geneticist, so he knows a bit about that.
Sounds exciting. If you've got any questions for Dr. Don Batten next week, send them through to our text line, and that is 0401 949 949. Thank you again, Dr. John.
Yeah, and I'll be back for a couple of sessions before we wind up for the end of the year.
Sounds good. You're on 94.9. It's 9 minutes to 5. Good afternoon.